The church bells rang like a warning, each chime slicing through the humid Georgia air and into my chest. I sat in the back pew, gripping the edge of the wooden bench, watching Ezra meet Ezra stand at the altar, radiant in a tailored suit, promising forever to another man. My heart screamed to run, to stop the ceremony, but my feet stayed rooted, bound by the weight of a truth I'd buried too long. My name is Julian Torres, and I'm 28, a graphic designer who fled the suffocating expectations of my family in Miami for the eclectic pulse of Seattle. Ezra Brooks, also 28, was the love I never saw. Kaminga, charismatic photographer with a laugh that could light up the darkest rooms and eyes that saw through every wall I'd built. We met 3 years ago at a queer art collective in Capitol Hill, where his bold portraits of marginalized voices hung next to my vibrant digital murals. Our connection was instant, electric, like finding a missing piece of myself in a stranger's smile. Late-night talks over cheap coffee turned into shared dreams, stolen kisses, and a love I thought was unbreakable. But fear mine. Ours had a way of unraveling everything. It started with whispers of doubt. Ezra's family, devout and unyielding, pressed him to settle down with someone they deemed respectable, someone who fit their narrow vision of a perfect life. I was too loud, too unapologetically queer, too much of a risk. Ezra, torn between love and loyalty, began to pull away, his warmth replaced by silences I couldn't decode. 6 months before the wedding, he told me he needed space, that he wasn't sure who he was anymore. I let him go, believing love meant setting him free, even if it shattered me. Now, here I was, in a small church outside Atlanta, an uninvited guest at his wedding to Marcus, a polished lawyer who checked every box Ezra's family adored. Marcus was 30, confident, with a smile that screamed privilege and a handshake that felt like a contract. I'd driven 2,000 miles to see this, to prove I could face the truth and move on. But as Ezra said, I do. His eyes flickered to the back of the room, finding mine for a fleeting second. That look raw, regretful, alive, ripped open every wound I tried to stitch shut. The reception was a blur of clinking glasses and forced laughter. I lingered on the edges, nursing a warm beer, watching Ezra dance with Marcus under string lights. Friends I hadn't seen in months approached, their pity thinly veiled. "You okay, Jules?" they'd ask, and I'd nod, lying through my teeth. I left before the cake was cut, driving through the night back to Seattle, chasing the horizon to outrun the ache. Back in my tiny apartment overlooking Puget Sound, I threw myself into work, designing posters for local queer events, each brushstroke a rebellion against my own heartbreak. Seattle's gray skies mirrored my mood, but the city's vibrant queer community kept me grounded. I'd see Ezra's name pop up in my inbox brief, polite emails about mutual friends or art shows, but I never replied. What was there to say? He'd made his choice. Months passed, and I started to rebuild. I dated casually, met new friends at drag brunches, and even adopted a scrappy tabby cat named Frida. But Ezra lingered like a song stuck in my head, his memory woven into every corner of the city we'd once explored together. I'd walk past the coffee shop where we'd argued about Basquiat versus Banksy, or the pier where he'd kissed me under a rare starry sky, and the ache would flare anew. One rainy November evening, a year after the wedding, I was sketching in my living room, Frida purring on the couch, when a knock startled me. It was late, nearly midnight, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door, and there he was, Ezra, soaked from the rain, his dark eyes wide with something I couldn't name. His breath hitched as he stepped closer, water dripping onto my doorstep. "Julian," he said, voice breaking. "It was always you." My heart stopped. The world tilted. 1,000 questions burned in my throat, but all I could do was stare, caught between the past and this impossible moment. "What are you doing here?" I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. He ran a hand through his wet hair, his wedding ring glinting under the porch light. I made a mistake, he said. I thought I could live the life they wanted. But every day without you feels like drowning. I left Marcus. I left everything. I need you to know I never stopped loving you. I wanted to slam the door, to protect myself from the chaos his words unleashed. But my body betrayed me, stepping aside to let him in. We stood in my cramped living room, the air heavy with rain and regret. Frida hissed from the couch, sensing the tension. You married him, I said, my voice sharp. You stood there and vowed to love him forever. What changed? Ezra's shoulders slumped, his confidence replaced by raw vulnerability. I thought I could make it work, that I could be the son my family wanted, the man Marcus needed. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw you. Your laugh, your art, the way you made me feel alive. I was a coward, Julian. I ran from us because I was scared of what it meant to choose you. His words hit like a tidal wave, stirring up emotions I'd buried deep. I wanted to hate him, to scream that he'd broken me. But the truth was Messier. I'd never stopped loving him either. You can't just show up and say this, I said, my voice cracking. You don't get to unravel my life again. I know, he whispered, stepping closer, close enough that I could smell the rain on his skin. But I had to try. I had to tell you before it was too late. We stood there, inches apart, the weight of a year's worth of pain and longing hanging between us. I didn't know if I could trust him, if I could risk my heart again. But as his hand reached for mine, trembling, I felt the spark that had always been ours, flickering back to life. The rain battered my apartment windows, a relentless drumbeat mirroring the chaos in my chest. Ezra stood before me, his hand still outstretched, his eyes pleading for a chance I wasn't sure I could give. I pulled away, crossing my arms to shield myself from the pull of his presence. Sit, I said, pointing to the couch. Frida leapt off, glaring at Ezra before disappearing into the bedroom. He sank onto the cushions, looking out of place in my carefully rebuilt world. I stayed standing, needing the distance. You don't get to just walk back in, I said, my voice steadier now. You broke us, Ezra. You chose him. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the floor. I know, and I'll carry that guilt forever. But I need you to understand why. He took a shaky breath, and I braced myself for whatever came next. My family, they made it feel like loving you was a betrayal. My mom, she'd cry every time I mentioned you, saying I was throwing away my future. My faith. My dad barely spoke to me unless it was to lecture me about duty. Marcus was safe. He was what they wanted. I laughed, sharp and bitter. Safe. You married a man you didn't love because he was safe. Do you hear how fucked up that sounds? I know, he said, meeting my eyes. But it wasn't just them. I was scared of how much I loved you. It was so big, Julian, so real. I didn't know how to handle it. I thought if I followed their rules, I'd find some kind of peace. Did you? I asked, my voice softer now, betraying the part of me that still cared. He shook his head. No. Every day with Marcus was a lie. He's a good man, but he's not you. I'd see your art online, hear your name at galleries, and it was like a knife. I'd dream of you, wake up hating myself for letting you go. I turned away, staring out at the rain-slicked city. Seattle's lights blurred through the window, a kaleidoscope of colors that matched my swirling thoughts. You hurt me, Ezra. You don't know what it was like, watching you build a life with him, knowing I wasn't enough. You were always enough, he said fiercely, standing now, closing the gap between us. I was the one who wasn't enough. I wasn't brave enough to fight for us. His words hung in the air, heavy with truth. I wanted to believe him, but trust was a fragile thing, and mine was in pieces. What happens now? I asked, turning to face him. You left him. But what does that mean? You think we can just pick up where we left off? No, he admitted. I know I have to earn you back. I had to start somewhere. I had to tell you the truth. We talked until dawn, the rain easing into a soft drizzle. He told me about the fights with Marcus, the pressure from his family, the moment he realized he couldn't keep living a lie. I told him about the nights I cried myself to sleep, the art I poured my pain into, the life I'd built without him. It was raw, messy, real. By the time the first light crept through the windows, we were both exhausted. But something had shifted. The wall between us wasn't gone, but it was cracked. I'm not promising you anything, I said as he stood to leave. But I'm not saying no either. He smiled, small and hopeful. That's more than I deserve. Over the next few weeks, Ezra didn't push. He'd text to check in, send me photos of his latest shoots, show up at my favorite coffee shop by coincidence. I resisted at first, keeping him at arm's length, but his persistence wore me down. We started meeting for coffee, then dinners, then long walks along the waterfront. Each moment felt like rediscovering a language we'd both forgotten how to speak. One night, at a queer poetry slam in Fremont, he read a piece about love lost and found, his voice trembling as he described a man with eyes like a storm and a heart like a canvas. The crowd didn't know it was about me, but I felt every word, my chest tight with emotion. After, we walked to Gasworks Park, the city skyline glittering across the water. I'm trying, Julian, he said, his hand brushing mine. I'm trying to be the man you deserve. I didn't reply, but I let my fingers lace with his, the warmth of his touch pulling me closer to a future I wasn't ready to name. The Seattle winter settled in, gray and relentless, but Ezra's presence was a stubborn spark of color in my world. We were cautious, orbiting each other like planets afraid to collide. Every touch, every glance, carried the weight of our history, but also the promise of something new. I invited him to my studio one chilly afternoon, a loft space in Pioneer Square where I'd been working on a mural for a local queer youth center. The walls were splashed with bold blues and fiery reds, a chaotic tribute to resilience. Ezra walked in, his camera slung over his shoulder, and froze. This is incredible, Julian, he said, his voice soft with awe. You're telling a story here. It's their story, I said, nodding toward the sketches of young queer faces pinned to the wall. Kids who've been kicked out, abandoned, but still keep going. I want them to see they're not alone. He stepped closer, studying a sketch of a non-binary teen with defiant eyes. You're giving them a home, he said, and the sincerity in his voice made my throat tighten. He turned to me, his expression raw. I want to be part of this. Your world. Your fight. I wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered like a shadow. You walked away once, I said, wiping paint from my hands. How do I know you won't again? He set his camera down, his movements deliberate. Because I've seen what life is without you. I've lived the lie, and it nearly destroyed me. I'm not that scared kid anymore. We worked side by side that day, him photographing my process, me stealing glances at his focused expression. It felt like old times, but better freer. When we finished, he showed me a photo he'd taken of me mid-paint, my face lit with passion. This is who you are, he said, and I'm in love with every part of it. My heart stuttered, but I didn't pull away. Instead, I kissed him, slow and deliberate, tasting the promise of a second chance. It wasn't forgiveness not yet, but it was a start. Our tentative reunion wasn't without obstacles. Ezra's family, still reeling from his separation from Marcus, bombarded him with calls and guilt trips. His mother sent long emails about family values, while his sister, the only ally in his family, urged him to follow his heart. I met her once, a fierce woman named Lila, 32, who hugged me tightly and whispered, "Don't let him screw this up again." Meanwhile, my own doubts gnawed at me. I'd built a life I was proud of, friends who became family. Art that mattered. Letting Ezra back in meant risking that stability. One night, over takeout in my apartment, I voiced it. What if we crash and burn again? I asked, chopsticks hovering over my pad thai. He set his plate down, his eyes steady. Then we crash. But I'd rather burn with you than live another day pretending I don't love you. His words disarmed me. But the real test came unexpectedly. Marcus showed up in Seattle, unannounced, tracking Ezra to a gallery opening where we were both exhibiting. He was as polished as ever, his suit crisp against the gritty art crowd. But his eyes were tired, haunted. Ezra, he said, ignoring me. We need to talk. The gallery buzzed around us, oblivious to the tension. Ezra's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Fine. Outside. I followed, my stomach churning. Under the neon glow of a bar sign, Marcus laid into him. You left me without a word. Ezra, after everything we built, was it all a lie? Ezra's voice was steady but pained. I never meant to hurt you, Marcus. But I wasn't honest with myself. And that wasn't fair to you. I'm sorry. Marcus turned to me, his gaze sharp. And you're okay with this? Taking him back after he ran. I bristled but kept my voice even. This isn't about you, Marcus. It's about us figuring out what's real. He laughed, cold and bitter, then walked away, leaving us in the drizzle. Ezra reached for my hand, and I let him take it. But the encounter left a crack in my resolve. Could I really trust this second chance? The encounter with Marcus shook us, but it also forced clarity. Ezra moved into a small apartment in Belltown, determined to rebuild his life on his own terms. He started therapy, unpacking years of familial pressure and self-doubt, and invited me to join him for a session. I hesitated, but went, sitting stiffly in a cozy office as a therapist named Dr. Gwen, a calm woman in her 50s, guided us through our fears. Love is a risk, she said, her voice gentle but firm. But so is living without it. What do you both want from this? Ezra spoke first, his voice raw. I want a life with Julian. Not the one my family scripted, but one we write together. I swallowed hard, my hands twisting in my lap. I want to trust him again. I want to believe we can be more than our mistakes. Dr. Gwen nodded. Then start small. Build trust through actions, not just words. We took her advice, moving slowly. We volunteered together at the Queer Youth Center, Ezra photographing their stories, me painting their dreams. We celebrated small victories, Ezra standing up to his mother's guilt trips, me opening up about my fears. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of us. One spring evening, we drove to Olympic National Park, a 4-hour trip from Seattle, chasing a rare, clear sky. We hiked to a cliff overlooking the Pacific, the waves crashing below like a heartbeat. Ezra set up his camera, capturing the horizon, then turned to me. I used to think love was about being perfect, he said, the wind tousling his hair. But it's about showing up, even when it's messy. I nodded, my chest tight. I'm scared, Ezra, but I'm here. He pulled me close, his lips brushing my forehead. That's enough for now. Back in Seattle, our lives intertwined more deeply. He met my chosen family drag queens, artists, activists who grilled him but slowly warmed to his sincerity. I met Lila again, who became a fierce advocate for us, even hosting a dinner where she toasted to love that fights back. But the shadow of Marcus lingered. He'd moved to Portland, but rumors reached us through mutual friends she was struggling, blaming Ezra for his unraveling life. One night, a letter arrived at Ezra's apartment, forwarded from Atlanta. It was from Marcus, handwritten, raw. He apologized for his anger, admitted his own role in their failed marriage, and wished Ezra happiness. I saw how you looked at Julian. He wrote. I never had that. Ezra read it aloud to me, tears in his eyes, and I felt a weight lift. Marcus's words weren't absolution, but they were closure. We started dreaming bigger. Ezra proposed a joint art project, a photomural series about queer love stories, starting with ours. We spent weeks planning, scouting locations, interviewing couples. The work was grueling but exhilarating. Each story a reminder of why we were fighting for this. At our first exhibit, in a packed gallery in Capitol Hill, I watched Ezra speak to the crowd, his voice steady, his hand in mine. This is for anyone who's ever had a fight to love, he said, and the room erupted in applause. Later, under the gallery's dim lights, he pulled me into a quiet corner. I don't have a ring, he said, his voice low, but I have a promise. I want forever with you, Julian. Not because it's easy, but because it's true. My heart pounded, but for the first time, it wasn't from fear. I'm not saying yes yet, I teased, smiling, but I'm not saying no. Summer arrived, painting Seattle in vibrant greens and blues. Our art project grew, drawing attention from local papers and queer organizations. Ezra and I were a team now, not just in love, but in purpose. But life, as always, tested us. My mother called from Miami, her voice tight with worry. She'd heard about Ezra through a cousin who'd seen our exhibit online. Julian, are you sure about this? She asked. He hurt you before. It was the first time she'd acknowledged my queerness without judgment, and it caught me off guard. I told her about our journey, the pain and the healing, and she listened. I just want you to be happy, she said finally, and I cried, realizing how much I'd needed her to say that. Ezra's family was less forgiving. His father sent a curt email disowning him, calling his choices a disgrace. Lila stood by him, but the loss cut deep. One night, as we sat on my balcony overlooking the Sound, he broke down. I thought I could handle losing them, he said, his voice thick. But it hurts. I held him, letting him grieve. You're not alone, I whispered. You have me. You have us. We leaned on our community, who rallied around us. Friends threw a family-free barbecue in Volunteer Park, where we laughed and danced, surrounded by people who loved us for who we were. Frida, now a fixture in our lives, curled up in Ezra's lap, a silent seal of approval. As our exhibit toured other cities, we faced new challenge strolls online, venues canceling due to controversy. But we pushed forward, driven by the stories we told, the lives we touched. One email from a trans teen in rural Oregon, who said our work gave them hope, made every fight worth it. On the anniversary of Ezra's return, we returned to the bench in the park where we'd first reconnected. The sunset was as golden as the day he'd knocked on my door, and we sat, hands intertwined, watching the city glow. I don't know what forever looks like, I said, my voice steady, but I want to find out with you. He smiled, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple silver ring, etched with a tiny wave, a nod to our city and our journey. I'm not asking you to marry me, he said, his eyes shining. Not yet. This is a promisito show up. To fight. To love you every day. I slipped the ring on, my heart full. I promised to, I said, and we kissed, the world fading around us. Our story wasn't perfect. There were still arguments, doubts, days when the past felt too heavy. But we faced them together, building a life rooted in truth. Our art became a beacon, our love a testament to resilience. And as we stood on that cliff overlooking the Pacific months later, planning our next project, I realized something. Love wasn't about never breaking. It was about choosing to rebuild. Together. Every time.